Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. My name is Tom Ricks, and I'm doing another single episode podcast so I can get to some of the serial episodes that I have been thinking about for quite some time. And this one is about China and the World Health Organization. So I wanted to clarify a couple of things real quick. First of all, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and even a broken, demented, rapist, disgusting clock like Trump is right once a day. And technically speaking, I'm sure if we can find a way to not be right at all or just stopped, he would find it. But the fact is that I guess in theory, much like the popular saying that if you had an infinite number of monkeys, you could bang out a script for Hamlet. In theory, if there's enough babble coming out of his lying mouth, eventually he would say something that is absolutely true. And in this case, the comments that he's been making about the World Health Organization are neither racist, as China likes to talk about, or in this case, wrong. The World Health Organization is, in fact, a bearer of blame for the virus, and China has, in fact, co-opted it. For those of you not familiar, the coronavirus is a cousin to another virus that came out several years ago called SARS, or I can't remember what it stands for, but the fact of the matter is that it's an acute respiratory syndrome. And essentially what it does is it causes difficulty in breathing, much the same way COVID-19 does. And it's the reason that we aren't having to wait an extra year for vaccines, because the fact is that we did such a good job of fighting SARS in the first place that many of the remedial technologies that were developed for it didn't need to go to distribution, even though it should have. But capitalism is a failure in this case because there wasn't enough money to be made on it. So a technology that could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives was never deployed just because certain pharmaceutical companies couldn't make a buck off of it. And it's beyond doubt that Trump is guilty of absolute negligence to the point of, frankly, murder on the virus. But let's call a duck, right? You know the popular saying that if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck and swims like a duck, it's a duck, no matter what you want to call it. And the fact is that this virus originated in China. Yeah, it probably wasn't a specialized, weaponized thing that they developed in some lab somewhere. No, it's just because they like to torture and eat exotic animals without proper preparation. And a lot of people say this is coming from bats. One of the more interesting theories I've seen is pangolin. Who the hell eats pangolins? Well, apparently in Wuhan, China, they eat pangolins and just about every other thing that you can imagine. And FYI, these wet markets are still in existence. China has done some token things like, supposedly you can't eat dogs there for now, but they've done this kind of thing in the past, so they'll probably continue to chow down on dogs in the immediate future because China is the number one source of killing animals around the world for medicinal parts and trophies, because China doesn't give a crap about doing right or wrong. And what few values China did have in terms of the rule of law and honoring its people have been thrown out the door by the current president, Xi, who is basically a fascist and has consolidated all power unto himself. China has done horrific things to its people, including a minority known as the Uyghurs. It has literally locked them in re-education camps simply because of their religion. Gee, I wonder who else is responsible for that, for doing something like that. Literally, as bad as Republicans are, they haven't tried to put people in camp. Oh wait, kids in cages. Never mind. But the fact is that in the case of the kids in cages, there are many governments around the world that are fascist with regards to refugees, including Turkey and Russia. But the fact of the matter is that China is unique in its widespread and essentially Nazi-like systemic re-education camps, politicizing simply being a Muslim, on and on and on. On top of that, they have this pernicious social credit score, which uses social media to encourage you to be a good little stool pigeon and report on your neighbors and do things that improve your China social credit score if you are loyal to the government. So let's not pretend that China is a nice place to live or that its people are nice. In fact, in this country, we have a subset of people on both sides of the aisle, left and right, who are China apologists and who feel that democracy isn't something that matters. In fact, some of the most racist people I can think of are people who agree with China's weak and also racist argument that democracy is a Western ideal and that it can't work in China. Oh, wait, Taiwan, which is a fully functional democracy and doesn't have sovereign rights of a nation because China doesn't want to give them up, and so has basically bribed huge portions of Africa or South America. And in Europe, there are countries like Spain, which are dealing with their own separatist issue in terms of the Catalonians who want to be free, so they routinely vote with China to lock up what is essentially a sovereign, independent country, but deny it access to international organizations, such as, coming full circle, the World Health Organization. Taiwan has had one of the most effective responses to the virus. People, including Trump, by the way, praised China's draconian response, using it as an argument that democracies were inherently weaker, and yet Taiwan, which is a democracy, has managed to respond with more efficiency and more safety for its own people than the authoritarian Chinese. And I'd like to throw in that the real reason that so many people have died, not only around the world, but in China, and that the virus was not stopped in China like SARS was, is in part A, because the lesson that China learned from SARS was not let's stop eating pangolins, but and showing down on whatever the else we can kill and eat and torture before we eat it. Their lesson was, the World Health Organization has shamed us. Let's take over the World Health Organization by giving billions in racist loans to Africa and get them to vote us onto the World Health Organization and have a racist president of the World Health Organization who will say whatever it is that their butt puppet master China tells them to say. And so when this virus came out, China literally locked up and then later killed the doctor who reported the virus in the first place. So I think we can all say that China is definitely to blame for this. China should be punished for this in a number of ways, including removing them from the Security Council, possibly stripping their general membership in the United Nations and giving it back to Taiwan, which held it until 1979 when Richard Nixon, we all remember that ethical guy, who basically thought that it was in America's strategic interest to engage China, which is not a democracy. And basically, the fact is that we need to find people like Fareed Zakaria, who say that everything is just fine in China, and stop listening to them. Because China apologists should have no social standing, should have no acceptance in our society. Biden is fortunately criticizing China as well. He could do better. But the fact is that China needs to be stripped of every international privilege until it decides that it's going to be a democracy. And for those of you who are thinking that I'm wrong, remember those protests in Hong Kong when they were basically standing up to the Chinese? Well, you can't have public protests in a virus. And so they've all been forced to go inside, and China has been basically ignoring the commitment and the treaty it made to keep Hong Kong free until 2047, and has been arresting the members of the democratic protests in Hong Kong in direct violation to both its treaties and its own laws and Hong Kong law. And it's been saying that it's doing so to honor the law. So what we have is a government that's fascist, that lies and ignores its own law, and then says that it's obeying the law in order to enforce it. We have a government that learned the lesson from SARS because they have open, disgusting, animal torturing wet markets. And instead of actually stopping this filthy and unwholesome practice, they basically just co-opted the messenger and basically prevented effective international notification and countering of this. So the fact is that basically China is fascist, just like Russia, just like Brazil, just like the Republican Party in the United States, just like Hungary, just like Iran, just like Turkey, and frankly, Venezuela, while it might not be fascist, is essentially also an illiberal democracy. The fact of the matter is that authoritarian regimes do not work, because if you don't have a free society, you don't have freedom of the press, and if you don't have freedom of the press, you don't have accountability. Now, I hear the whining centrist in the back going, well, didn't you do your last podcast about Fox News? Yeah, Fox News is not a journalistic organization. When you exist to do nothing but lie and shout fire in a crowded theater, you're not a news organization. Fox News has no public good whatsoever, and I'm still 100% in favor of shutting them down. There are still plenty of conservative pieces of trash that are basically garbage, but are still opposition newspapers like Politico or the Washington Times. Anyway, my point is that China is a problem, and if you hear somebody saying that it's racist to call their ownership of the WHO racist, then not only are they racist, but they're lying, and you should stop talking to them and probably block them.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, available in many markets, including at Amazon.com. Copyright
2019.
Red Anvil Amalgamated, LLC.
To fight the forces of evil!